Thank you for joining us. I can't think of a better person to have than Representative Jamie Raskin on this day when democracy is not only under siege in our country, but in Ukraine, in other parts of this world. But Jamie has been a democracy defender. Well, I think from the moment he took a breath. And he is with us today to talk about many things, but this is a chance to honor his book, which I trust all of you have read, Unthinkable: Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. And in it, Jamie, if I might, tells the story of the 45 days at the start of 2021 that permanently changed his life, his family's, as he confronted the painful, painful loss of his amazing son, Tommy. How he lived through the violent insurrection in our nation's capital and led the impeachment effort to hold President Trump accountable for inciting political violence. I want to say that Jamie also speaks for many of us who have lost a loved one to suicide. We don't want them remembered only for the way they died, and I think Jamie has spoken to Tommy's life in extraordinary ways. So today, he discusses in his book this unimaginable convergence of personal grief and public trauma. His words about the loss of his son and the power of Tommy's convictions fueled his work in the aftermath of modern democracy's darkest days, searing. He recounts the horrors of that day. And he also recounts the power of democracy toward a more perfect union in his work, and how he will not allow this country to lose its democracy. He will talk to us, I think, about the impeachment struggles, his leading of one. I want to say that in the canon of literature about grief, I was just reading Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking, and I have to say, Jamie, your book is in that canon and in that work. So all power to you, because we've always known you're an extraordinary congressperson, and you've run some tough races. John and I remember supporting, the nation supported you when you ran for the state Senate. Your race for Congress was not easy. You had a multimillionaire and a TV host, but you persevered, and your grassroots campaigning, working like it was a movement, was very powerful. I just want to say a brief word. Jamie's father was on the editorial board of The Nation for many, many years, Mark Raskin, and he was a visionary, someone who worked in his own personal life, but in his work for peace and security. And he was someone who would have been, as Jamie is, defending democracy today. So I just want to, may Jamie's work, this example, inspire us in these dark days, but days in which we will continue to fight and persevere and find a way forward. I want to thank John. I can't imagine working at The Nation without John Nichols. He's been a correspondent for 25 years, an ally in every serious struggle, and a great writer. He writes a book every year. Don't know how he does that. He has a new book out about pandemic profiteers, so you should all read that. And Tope Follerin, who's just become executive director in the last year of the Institute for Policy Studies, which Jamie's father co-founded with Richard Barnett. And Tope is a beautiful novelist. Read his work. He is recipient of the Whiting Awards. I believe he just won an NEA Creative Fellowship. And I'm proud to say you're reviewing a book for The Nation soon.
Yeah.
So I want to turn it over to John. And I want to thank everyone for joining us, and especially Representative Jamie Raskin, who has so much on his plate. And we are going to be watching and cheering you on, Jamie, as you do something which not many do, but not only preserve what we have as our democracy, but understand that the quest for a more perfect union is not to be given up. So thank you, everyone. John Nichols.
Thank you so much, Katrina. And thanks to everyone who's joined us. So we have over in our chat section on the side, people popping in from where they're from around the country. And it's an amazing scope of the United States, and a testament to Representative Raskin, who so many people have come to value, not just as the representative from a district in Maryland, but really the representative from democracy. And so we are honored to have all of you with us. We're honored to have the Congressman. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go quickly here and sort of get things started. We'll bring Katrina back in and Tope in as well with some questions and thoughts, and then we'll go to your questions. But first off, as way of extending the introduction for just a moment, Congressman Raskin, you in your remarkable book obviously write a great deal about your son, Tommy, and you and Tommy and your father were all contributors to The Nation magazine. And I wonder if you could just open up for a moment and tell us a little bit about your family's long-term relationship with The Nation, including Tommy's.
Well, John, thank you so much. And Katrina, thanks to you, the whole Nation family, the IPS family. Tommy was not only a youthful contributor to The Nation and The Nation Online, but he was also an intern at IPS for a summer. He worked with Phyllis Bennis and got to see my dad. You know, my dad at that point was not like full-time, but he was hanging around, of course. And that was a very special time where Tommy got to see his grandpa there. Yeah, I mean, The Nation has always been just kind of a lodestar and a center of gravity for our family. IPS, of course, has been, you know, a major passion, not just for my dad, but for everybody in our family. So our lives are super intertwined.
Jamie, with that said, I'm going to jump right into the moment that we're in, and it relates to your book. Your book talks about accountability and about impeachment, and you were the lead manager for the second impeachment of Donald Trump. But I want to take you back to the first impeachment because that related to Ukraine, and I'm interested in your thoughts on sort of the blowback for this country as a result of the politicization of relations with Ukraine, and frankly, the failure to hold Donald Trump to account in the start of 2000. We'll go later to start of 2001, but I wonder if you could begin there.
Well, the Ukraine shakedown was all about the big countries, the US and Russia, trying to subordinate Ukraine and use Ukraine and the government and the president for their own purposes. And of course, there's a long history of Russia trying to use Ukraine for the oil there. And Donald Trump, remember, held up government aid and foreign aid to President Zelensky for him to just do us a little favor. And that favor was to state that Joe Biden was the subject of a criminal investigation there. And he, you know, for Trump, it's always enough just to insinuate some innuendo in the same way he just wanted to topple his own leadership at the DOJ to put Richard Clark in, just so Clark would say that there was corruption out there that Mike Pence would use as the pretext for rejecting electoral college votes the second time around. So the global outpouring of nonviolent but muscular solidarity and defense of the Ukrainian democracy against Putin's attempt to rebuild a right-wing Russian empire, to me, has been extraordinarily uplifting. And I think you're right. There's a history that remains to be told about the way that Ukraine has been used by the larger countries, and that cuts against everything we believe in terms of national sovereignty and the democracy of peoples.
Is there a global war on democracy? Is there a global threat to democracy? I mean, we talk about it so much in the US, and you've been central to the struggle to assert small d democracy in this country, but it doesn't stop at our borders, does it?
No, not at all. I mean, the Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, Putin, Orban, El-Sisi, Duterte, Bolsonaro worldview is all about creating basically a collection of right-wing authoritarians and kleptocrats, despots, and bullies all over Earth. And democracy, the nation and IPS know better than anybody, is not a static thing that you're defending. Democracy is dynamic concept. I mean, we didn't start as a democracy. We started as a slave republic of white male property owners over the age of 21. But through social and political struggle, we have opened America up. We have striven to be a more perfect union, where we've strived to be a more perfect union. That's the dynamic that we've got to defend. I mean, if you read Tocqueville's Democracy in America, he makes a really astute point in passing where he says that voting rights and democracy in America are always either shrinking and shriveling away, or they're expanding and growing. And we've been in a contractionary period with this assault on democracy. What we're in a struggle for today, we're in the fight of our lives, really, to vindicate the majority will and the idea of democracy. The vast majority of people reject Trump and Trumpism. Hillary beat him by 3 million votes in the popular vote. Joe Biden beat him by more than 7.5 million votes in the popular vote. The young people are coming our way. The new Americans are coming our way. But what they've got is a bag of anti-democratic tricks: the gerrymandering of our congressional districts, the use of the filibuster to establish that a majority is not enough. You need a supermajority. You need not 51 senators, you need 60 senators in order to get anything done. Right-wing judicial activism through the packing of the courts and the improvisation of just outrageous legal ideas, the voter suppression statutes. That's the struggle that we're in. I mean, I'm with the small d Democrats like John Dewey, who always said that the solution to the ills of democracy is more democracy. Because what we're suffering from today is not democracy, it's from a series of assaults on democracy. And those definitely have a global character. And the authoritarians have all found each other. And I believe now, really for the first time with Ukraine, the democratic governments, movements, peoples are working together to defend democracy against this new global right-wing authoritarian axis.
Last question I'm going to ask you, or before we bring some other folks in, but let me, when you ran the impeachment trial, it seemed to me, talking to you some as it was going on behind the scenes, but also just watching you, that it wasn't just a trial of Donald Trump. It was really a trial of the Republican Party. And I don't mean it as some sort of partisan battle back and forth, but it was a test. Would the Republican Party rise to hold one of its own to account? You succeeded in getting an unprecedented number of Republican senators to come across and vote to convict, but it obviously was insufficient. Do you think that failure of the party to step up at that point kind of wrote our history going forward to some extent, at least as regards the Republican Party?
Yeah, I think I think we talked about this at the time, John. When I would talk to the Republican senators, I would say to them, you need to do this for America. You need to do it for the truth. You need to do it for the Constitution, but you need to do it for your party, because he will destroy your party. And so to the very end, I thought there was a chance we could win 100-0, not 57-43. I thought that the evidence was so overwhelming, so devastating, so irrefutable, certainly unrefuted, that they might say, you know what, this is our chance to get rid of this monster. And it's not like there's any love lost between them. I mean, he called, Ted Cruz's wife fat and ugly and said, Cruz's father killed JFK, and similar things about other senators. And they said other stuff like that about him. So, there was no love lost amongst them. They could have done it had they shown the backbone. And now they've got to deal with it. They've got to deal with everything from, Trump praising Putin's genius to his determination to run the GOP like an authoritarian religious cult of personality of one person. They position themselves outside of the constitutional order. They attack our constitutional processes. They attack the outcome of our elections, and they don't accept the idea that they could lose. They are a rule or ruin party.
And let me bring Katrina vanden Heuvel in, who you've known since you were a very young political activist, to give you a couple of questions, and then we'll bring Tope in.
I wanted to pick up on the impeachment struggle, but a broader question about a popular front coalition. You made a case, Jamie, when you spoke to the Nation crowd a few months ago about the need to ally with a Liz Cheney, for example. And I wonder if you could make the case, because in the preservation of democracy, small d democracy, obviously something we deeply, deeply value, but it's tricky. And welcome your thoughts.
Well, when I say that, it's because I've just done a brief canvas of fascist coups in history, whether we're talking about Greece, Italy, Argentina, Chile, what have you. And it seems to me that the left can never win on its own, that you don't find examples of progressive and liberal parties beating fascism on their own. It's when it works, it's a coalition between the left parties and the center-right parties. And, you know, I don't need to tell you, there's lots of things that I've aggressively disagreed with Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger about. But they are dealing in a world of fact. They're dealing in a world of reality. And they defend the constitutional framework. They accept the idea that their party can lose. I mean, we just lost a big election down in Virginia for governor. We didn't storm the Virginia state capitol and beat the hell out of a bunch of police officers and smash them over the head with steel pipes and Confederate battle flags and go out lying about what happened. We accepted that. I think that's the right thing to do. I mean, isn't it? I mean, so.
No, it's yeah. I just wanted you to make the case. I mean, coalitions are really important, but often very tough for people to understand the power and the necessity of a coalition of time-bound nature. And
well, I mean, I think we've got to look at specifically, you know, what the character of an alliance or coalition is. I mean, we're an alliance in the House with our select committee to determine the events of January 6th, the causes of the events, and what needs to be done to fortify democratic institutions going forward. I mean, that's precisely the place where we want to try to build as big a tent as possible to bring, you know, to bring everybody in. You know, I hope that Liz holds her seat in Wyoming. I know that Democrats out there are allowed to decide which primary. I mean, anybody can decide which primary they're voting in when they show up at the polls. I hope, you know, I hope whether or not she wins, that she will go ahead and take on Trump in the Republican Party. And then I hope, you know, she wins, and I hope we beat her, you know. But, you know, it would be great to have two pro-democracy parties. Right now, the Democratic Party is the party of democracy right now. And we can say that. I hear from Republicans every day, independents who are coming over and joining the Democratic Party for that reason. And you know, it's not based just on like presidential charisma or something like that. It's based on the fact that we need to restore the muscle of democratic vision and activism in every institution. I mean, democracy, as you guys again know better than anybody, democracy is not the product of one institution like the Congress or the presidency. It is our civil society. It is our universities. It's our think tanks. It's our press institutions. That is democracy, which is why we've got to defend all of these freedoms against the authoritarians.
I'm going to turn it over to Tope if I could, but I just want to ask people on the call to visit your Democracy Summer, your site, because I think in that you're all engaging with a younger generation and they're learning about small d democratic building. Yeah. And I think that's exciting. Yeah.
I launched it as a way to get our daughters, Hannah and Tabitha and Tommy, engaged in my campaign, and all my nieces and nephews. And, you know, they were like, what are we going to put on our resume? That we worked for our uncle's losing state Senate campaign? And I said, we're not losing. You're not just working for my campaign. You're working for Democracy Summer. And they said, what's that? I'm like, we're going to have the greatest people in the world come and speak to you. Like Katrina, vanden Heuvel.
It's a great program. It's a great. So Tope, I'm over to you.
First of all, such a pleasure to be speaking with you. As you know, your father was a great mentor to me. And many of the books that I have behind me, he gave me. I used to spend evenings at his home, and he would, every time I went there, I would leave with a big stack of books. We would talk for hours about art and politics. He was an extraordinary man, so it's obvious that he had an extraordinary son as well. So it's a pleasure to be in conversation with you. I was rereading, let me first of all join the chorus of praise for your great book. It's incredible. I really enjoyed reading it. And I was rereading it last night, and I came across a line that really struck me, especially in light of current events. You write, tyrants tell stories about themselves because history for them begins and ends with their own insatiable appetites. It seems to me that this is happening before our eyes in Ukraine now. Tyrants are also adept at telling stories that people want to hear, of course. So I wanted to ask you, how do you think democracies ought to counteract these stories, especially since these stories provide solace for many millions of people who are frankly unsettled by what the future may bring?
Well, thanks for raising that in your kind words, Tope. It's great to see you, and I know how fond my dad was of you, so thank you for those kind words. I mean, we need the counter stories, and that's why I wrote my book, and I know that's why you write your books. In other words, yeah, I mean, Trump and Putin and the gang would love nothing more than for history to be about them and their, ridiculous, Disney character style, overblown ambitions and pretensions. And democracy has got to be about all of us, and not larger than life people, but normal sized people, and what our lives are like and what we're doing. And so, I mean, we're seeing just a magnificent, let's hope, manifestation of that around the world today, right now. And let's hope it begins to sweep away the authoritarians in every society.
Hear, hear.
Tope raised a really, he did it in his very graceful way, but he raised one of the most interesting things about your book. It's so well written. And we don't always expect members of Congress to write beautiful books. And I want to ask you a question, Jamie, that sort of intersects between your speeches at the impeachment trial and this book. How do you do it? How, as somebody as busy as you are with all the demands, and frankly, during the impeachment trial with the incredible emotional demands on you, how do you focus yourself to, frankly, write so gracefully and so movingly?
And I just note that I'm desperate for the answer to this question.
Well, thank you both, John and Tope.
Yeah, I know. Second, third.
Well, look, I mean, as you know, 2021 was a year of profound grief and despondency for us. We lost Tommy on the very last day of 2020. But I guess the answer is that, I was in an insomniac trance for most of the year. I mean, what you read was written basically in the middle of the night, because I would come home from the Hill and then I would stay up. I mean, I wasn't sleeping anyway. I mean, I was up so late, I couldn't even call people on the West Coast, So, there are natural born writers. I'm speaking to a bunch of them who write all the time, no matter what's going on. And I'm somebody who writes really only when I have something definitive that I need to say, that I have to, I mean, I've written, I think 3 other books, co-authored one, so 3.5 other books, but I hadn't written a book in a long time. But this one, just came pouring out of me. And it was, it was a love letter to Tommy, and it was a love letter, to the America that I want to see, the America that lives in our hearts, and the kind of world that Tommy was fighting for. I mean, he was somebody who hated fascism, he hated war, he hated authoritarianism. As you know, he was not fond of people eating animals. He was a strong vegan, though not a guilt-tripping vegan, but he was a very strong vegan. And he linked our being conditioned to accept the slaughter of animals to our being willing to, being conditioned to accept the slaughter of human beings. So I know I learned a lot from my dad. I learned a lot from my son.
Good answer. Did you learn
I
anything
asked
from Tom?
Jamie,
Oh, sure.
so Jamie, many years ago, you've been writing for The Nation, many terrific essays, and you wrote the lead essay in an issue we did on the 1% court, which was important prefiguring of what we're witnessing. I wonder if you might talk about the future of the courts. That's a big question, but we face a nomination coming, a very fine nominee. And if life had taken a different turn, I think you might have been editor of the Harvard Law Review, not your colleague, President Obama. So you could.
Yeah, I followed him by a few years, or he followed me because he took those years off to organize. Well, you know, it's a tough subject for me because the Supreme Court could be such a magnificent institution. We got a glimpse of that during the Warren Court period, where it really tried to spell out the meaning of equal protection, like with respect to school desegregation and the rights of women in Roe versus Wade and the rights of people in the street and Miranda versus Arizona. But it's such a brief time period, and I want people to see that for the vast majority of its history, the Supreme Court's been a profoundly reactionary institution. I mean, think of all of the time that elapsed between the beginning of the Republic and the Civil War, when the Supreme Court did nothing for the enslaved people, zero, other than to cement slavery in the Dred Scott decision and to say that the African American has no rights that the white man is bound to respect, in hundreds of pages of just excruciating prose laying out that this is a white man's compact. All of the stuff that our GOP friends don't want us to be able to study or talk about because that's critical race theory. Actually, those are just critical race facts, the critical facts about racism that people need to know. And it didn't get much better after the Civil War. I mean, we had the Reconstruction Amendments that the radical Republicans fought for, but it got totally undercut and eviscerated by the Supreme Court until you get, Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, constitutionalizing American apartheid and, separate but equal. So, and that's just emblematic of where the court has been on a whole series of issues, whether it's, political white supremacy or corporate power, the rights of individuals. So, I would love nothing more, than to have a Supreme Court that really stood for the people's Constitution. But what we've got is a court that has been eviscerating the Voting Rights Act, eviscerating the Civil Rights Act. I mean, look what happened in Shelby County versus Holder. Look what happened in the Brnovich case. The court is not our friend. So I'm psyched about the nomination. I know Judge Jackson a little bit. I think she'll be a terrific Supreme Court justice, but we're looking at a 6-3 majority for a while until we have some, other kinds of changes. And that is part of a long-running plan to combine right-wing dark money in America with this Federalist Society apparatus, which now accounts for something like 4 out of 5 judges that the Republicans have put on the bench.
I have a very quick question. I don't want to contemplate this future, but I suppose just for the sake of argument, I'm wondering what will become of the work of the January 6th Commission if there's a GOP takeover at the midterms. What happens to the commission and the incredible and important work that all of you are doing right now?
Well, the House of Representatives, unlike the Senate, is a body that ends every 2 years because the whole body is elected all over again. Whereas, the Senate, because the overlapping 6-year terms just keeps going. It's a continuing body, and we're not. So I think that the bipartisan select committee on January 6th feels very much the urgency of what we're doing, because if the House, God forbid, were to fall into wrong hands, it would almost certainly just be terminated because they're not interested in it. Or I take it that the debate in the Republican caucus is, do you just end it or do you do what they've tried to do in terms of like the Mueller investigation, which is you turn the investigation on the investigators, which is what like Newt Gingrich has been saying, that those of us on the committee are going to be the targets of the investigation, which is, obviously a fascistic tactic.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up. Do you think anything substantial will happen then before that date in terms of?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we're going to have hearings, which I think will be explosive when people see this was not some kind of rally that got a little bit out of hand, when they see that it was not, Trump's mob greeting our officers with flowers and hugs and kisses, as he said. And we'll do a report, and we're going to do a report in a really powerful, cogent, compelling way. I hope with a mixture of text and video to explain to people what happened. I mean, maybe we'll even transform the concept of what a report is in our committee so that people will be able to understand it at a whole lot of different levels. But this was an attack on our government. And, you guys have probably heard me talk before about the 3 rings of sedition, a mob riot surrounding a violent insurrection conducted by domestic violent extremist groups, white nationalist, racist groups, like the Proud Boys, who Trump told to stand back and stand by, like the Oath Keepers, who've been charged with seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government, like the militia groups, the QAnon networks, the 3 Percenters, the Unification Church, and so on. A lot of political, religious, authoritarian cults were in there. And then that was surrounding a coup, an attempt by Trump and his political entourage to overthrow Biden's 306 vote majority in the Electoral College, to lower it below 270. And at that point, to kick the whole contest into the House of Representatives for a so-called contingent election under the 12th Amendment. And the reason for that, if you're asking why would Trump want the House of Representatives under Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats to decide, it's because the 12th Amendment provides that we're not voting one member, one vote, we're voting one state, one vote. And they had 27 state delegations after the 2020 elections. We have 22. Pennsylvania, 9-9, is split right down the middle. So even had they lost through the defection of that large representative from Wyoming, Liz Cheney, they still would have had 26 votes to, if they could have just convinced Pence to do this, to reject those electors coming in from Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, they could have declared Trump the president. He would have invoked the Insurrection Act, declared something like martial law, finally brought in the National Guard to put down the insurrectionary chaos he'd unleashed against us, declare himself a hero and president for the next 4 years. And then we would have moved into a very different kind of government. And that's what they had planned for us.
Could I ask a quick question, Jamie? You mentioned this might come as a different kind of report. Are you suggesting it could be a video report? What are the elements of it? And what's the timing? I'm just curious.
Well, I think that our hearings are likely to be end of April, May. And then it remains to be seen when the report would come out. It could be, everything from the beginning of the summer to the beginning of the fall. But, I'm not sure. I remember sitting there with the Mueller report, all 600 pages of it or whatever, when it came out. I'm thinking, how many people can actually be reading this? I don't think that helps. So I think we've just got to be more creative in thinking about what a report is.
Did that, Jamie, you did that with the impeachment trial. The impeachment trial was different than any impeachment trial before it, with the use of video, the use of incredible timelines, your remarkable use of your team of managers and bringing them in. You know what I mean? It was, and I hope people won't see this as a diminishing term, it was choreographed in a way that communicated a message.
Well, we had the most remarkable team of managers, former prosecutors, public defenders, people who really knew what they were doing. And, my main role was to say, this is not a collection of speeches. Throw away all the speeches. We're just telling a story from beginning to middle to end. And when we have to address legal stuff, we'll address it. We'll punch back. will explain why the Constitution is totally on our side. And of course, Trump's lawyers ended up being so pitiful that we didn't even have to do that much of that. But we wanted to tell a story that really stuck in their minds. And we did get 7 of the Republicans to join us from New England, the Mid-Atlantic, the South, the Midwest, the West, Alaska, from all over the country. That's 14% of the Republican caucus. And it's just, it's sad to me that McConnell, made that speech where he basically said we had proven our case. He said he had no doubt that actually, factually, morally, Donald Trump was responsible. He basically said we had proven our case, but they didn't have jurisdiction to exercise over the trial because Trump had left office, which was a legal claim that had been rejected on the first day of the trial by the Senate in a 54-46 vote, and a legal claim that's been rejected basically since the beginning of the Republic. It's been made repeatedly, and it's always rejected. Don't get me started on that. But that's like in a criminal prosecution, if somebody says, you can't use that gun against me because it was illegally seized, and the court finds, no, it wasn't illegally seized. At that point, you have to drop it. You move to the facts of the trial. And if you go back to that later, that is what we call jury nullification. That's the jury stepping outside of its role as the decider of fact and deciding on some other basis. And that's essentially what McConnell did. And I think it's because he did not have enough Republicans to go along with him. If he'd had a majority of the Republicans, if he had 26 of them, then I think he would have done it, because he would have been assured of his own continuity in office. But of course, he was afraid that Trump would organize an overthrow of his leadership.
Jamie, we've gotten deep into the committee here, and it's interesting because the questions that are coming from folks around the country steer very much toward the committee. There's a lot of the select committee. There's a lot of fascination with it, and you've answered already a lot of Susan Edelman's questions, because she wanted to know, or at least tried to answer. She wanted to know when the report, when will the hearings begin? You're saying probably late August, late April, early May.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're getting overwhelming cooperation from people, including insurrectionists. The problem is when we get right around the Trump's entourage, that's where we're encountering the real blowback from, Steve Bannon and Giuliani, and Mark Meadows is kind of doing the hokey pokey, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But it's basically that group of 8 or 9 people right around him that are, giving us fits.
Will these be televised hearings?
Yeah.
What's your sense of, do you think, you can, depending on the state of the world at that point, that it might be live on CNN and on, what's your sense of how this might play?
Well, yeah, I would hope whoever wants to cover us, I'm not quite sure how they do that, but yeah, I would hope it's in prime time and that everybody will get a chance to watch. After all, it is our democracy. So I would hope we could do whatever we can to allow people to watch it.
Jordan, I just want to make sure I'm going back through my questions here, of which we have quite a few. So my first one was from Jordan Whiteman, I think, and he was saying some of the most devastating, Jordan asked, some of the best evidence against Trump would be the outtakes from his message to the insurrectionists on January 6th. And so it's not just what he said in the speech, but what he was saying around there. And Jordan wonders, does the select committee have those outtakes? Do you have access to that?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the most damning pieces of evidence, to my mind, both for this process, but also when we were in the impeachment trial, was that after Trump saw what was going on, after the violence overrode the Capitol, dozens and dozens of officers getting smashed in the face and sprayed with chemical agents and beat up, after they broke our windows, stormed our doors, shut down the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history, then chanted "Hang Mike Pence," and driving him out of the building, Trump tweets out, leave my vice president alone, but he tweets out, Mike Pence did not have the courage to do what needed to be done, or something to that effect. There's a lot of that. It's similar, to what I view now as a dress rehearsal for January 6th, which was the attack on the Michigan State Capitol, which then turned into a plot to kidnap and assassinate the governor. Again, when she was, basically being hounded and chased and threatened with her life, Trump is still inciting the mob against her, talking about, how, she's been violating everybody's rights and so on. So Gretchen Whitmer, I'm sure, could recognize a lot of what happened to Mike Pence on that day.
Yeah. We have a lot of questions from people that kind of come back to the same point, and that is, why do you think it is so hard, as one questioner asked, why is it so hard to nail Trump? I mean, why is it so hard? And you, as his, for lack of a better term, prosecutor in the second impeachment trial, again, you got a clear majority. But why do you think, what hold does he have on his party, and what frankly hold does he have on a substantial portion of the American people?
Well, most corporate CEOs would understand, and most mob bosses would understand what Trump does. Everything is a wink and a nod. Everything is done through other people. He surrounds himself with loyal sycophants who know what he wants to accomplish. Nothing is ever written down. If it is, it's ripped up into tiny little pieces of paper. He also travels with an army of lawyers, ever since he was a kid with daddy's money. So I know it's maddening to people. And, he really is the poster boy for white male privilege in America. I mean, if you ever doubt that white male privilege exists, look at the career of Donald Trump. But having said all that, I'm with Dr. King. I think, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and he will get his comeuppance in the end. And, in terms of the January 6th Select Committee, I mean, our goal, our primary goal is not individual accountability. Our goal is collective and public accountability. And we need to make the changes that we need to strengthen our democratic institutions with voting rights through the electoral college system. As long as we're going to have it, we need to protect the popular voice in it. There are a lot of things that we need to do. And those are the kind of changes that the January 6th committee is focused on.
Well, I think your long arc of history answer will make questioner Ruth Strauss very happy. She had like 3 questions in here about, how do you get to this, or will we get to it? David Holtzman asked a question that literally comes off what you were just saying. And he said, we met at a League of Women Voters convention some years ago, and asked, what are you thinking now about strengthening democracy through electoral reform, including ranked choice voting?
Well, I am the sponsor of the ranked choice voting bill in Congress with my buddy Don Beyer from Virginia. And, Donald Trump's election within the Republican Party is actually a pretty good demonstration of why we need ranked choice voting. He never really went above, I think it was 33 or 35%. A majority of the Republicans, I think, were pretty repulsed by what he was having to offer, but he just sort of went after each opponent one by one. And then he was kind of like the last guy standing. Ranked choice voting is all about making sure that you actually have majority support. And it reduces negative campaigning. So I'm all for that. I think, as I was saying at the beginning, we got to get back on the growth road of democracy. And that means, we need statehood for people in Washington, D.C. That's 713,000 disenfranchised Americans who've been, kicked around for too long, who deserve their statehood. 3.5 million people in Puerto Rico who deserve their statehood. It means we need real voting rights protection for everybody, because the voter suppression statutes are now targeting early voting, weekend voting, mail-in balloting, absentee balloting, crazy laws like the one in Georgia, which say it's a crime to give somebody a bag of potato chips while they're waiting in a 6-hour line to vote, So we've got to get that done. But you see the kind of matrix of GOP democracy suppression we're in. We can't pass that through the Senate because of the filibuster. So the filibuster protects the voter suppression statutes, which protect GOP majorities in the legislatures, which protect their gerrymandering of our districts. So you've got basically blue states that continue to have Republican legislatures, like Pennsylvania, I think Wisconsin. You tell me, John. I think they still do. I mean, it's just an outrageous situation, but the gerrymandering is self-perpetuating from decade to decade. And if all you care about is power, and you literally have no agenda. I mean, the GOP convention in 2020 came back with no platform for the first time in the history of modern political parties. If you have literally no agenda, then your agenda is whatever Donald Trump says it is, and voter suppression and just hanging on to power. And that's what we're up against. Madeleine Albright says in her book, which is really pretty good, fascism should not be understood as having a specific ideological content. Fascism should be understood as a strategy for taking and then holding power. And that's an illuminating way of thinking about what we're up against today.
You and I knew each other long before you ran for Congress. And I think it's fair to say we bonded on our mutual affection for the concept of impeachment. Beyond individual presidents, that it is an accountability tool. And one of our questioners, David Holtzman, asked, what are the chances for a third impeachment of Donald Trump for mishandling records, corrupt pardons, or something else? And this becomes an interesting question because obviously a good question, but then extending it beyond, impeachment is an accountability tool. It's often seen as simply a tool to get somebody out of office. You were impeaching Donald Trump after he had left office in the second trial. Talk to us a little bit about that concept of bringing accountability into our politics and into our governance that extends beyond the individual, but more to the concept that if you do wrong, you will be held to account, and it will have lasting impact.
Well, the impeachment provisions include impeachment in the House, and of course, Trump was impeached twice, trial and conviction in the Senate, and then disqualification from holding further office, which was just as important to the framers. And it was also important to the Reconstruction framers who built it into Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which provides another way to disqualify, because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says, if you've sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, then you violate that oath by participating in insurrection or rebellion against the United States, then you may not serve again in federal or state office, which parallels the specific disqualification for somebody who's been impeached and convicted, where there is a separate vote. So we're not done with him yet in that respect, but the framers were deeply skeptical of what any one person could do with that kind of power, which is why the Congress is in Article 1, with all of these powers, dozens and dozens of powers, and the president's in Article 2 with 4 short sections, one of them, Section 4, being all about how you impeach a president for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. What's the core job of the president? To take care that the laws are faithfully executed. If somebody's not taking care of the laws are faithfully executed, you evict, you eject, you reject, you impeach, you convict, you disqualify, you start over again. I mean, it's a big country. We've got hundreds of millions of people. We don't need, we don't need someone who's proven himself to be a constitutional outlaw like Donald Trump to continue to be our president just because he's got a lot of money.
It sounded like an IPS report there. And let me ask you one other question here in this regard. Again, coming off some of these very good questions that people have asked. You seem in so many senses to channel the founders. Obviously, you're a huge critic of many of the founders because of their personal foibles, but you clearly have thought a lot about where they were coming from, what they were seeking to accomplish. Talk to us for a second about how you reconcile slaveholders, slave traders, people who, I think we look back on historically and now have a lot of trouble with this document that you clearly revere. And because I think a lot of people wrestle with that.
I mean, first of all, there were differences among the founders. Tom Paine was an abolitionist. Benjamin Franklin was an abolitionist. And, you know, Tom Paine, he was extraordinary. I mean, he basically, I mean, even the most radical people opposing the British tyranny still were defining themselves as Britishmen and still were asking for the rights of Britishmen under the Magna Carta. And when Tom Paine wrote Common Sense, he basically was calling for independence, and he was calling for a republican form of government and saying, we don't need the kings, and we don't need the unification of church and state, and we don't need any of that stuff. And like that's just the absolute radicalism of the, you know, the revolutionary spirit of Tom Paine. And, you know, what do you do with those who made these fateful, just humiliating compromises with slavery, like Thomas Jefferson? I mean, you know, you take them for what they're worth. I mean, Jefferson should be celebrated for the language that he put in the Declaration about all men being created equal, and the inalienable rights of people, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the consent of the governed, even though he didn't live up to it, even though he was a hypocrite. He established those concepts that later generations of radical Democrats who had much greater vision than Jefferson were able to use to expand the application of the Constitution. And so, you know, I think we can take them for what they're worth. But I mean, I view the abolitionists, Frederick Douglass, you know, Wendell Phillips, the people who fought for abolition and then fought to win the Civil War and the Reconstruction, also as founders of our Constitution, as framers of the Reconstruction Constitution, because they are, you know, they were so critical to the changes that we made. If you look at the amendments that we've had since the Bill of Rights, there's 17 of them. The vast majority have been about expanding democracy, voting rights, and the application of constitutional principles to more and more people. So the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, 14th Amendment equal protection due process, 15th Amendment bans race discrimination in voting, 17th Amendment shifts the mode of election of US senators from the legislatures to the people, the 19th Amendment gives us women's suffrage, 23rd Amendment says people in DC can participate in presidential elections, 24th Amendment bans poll taxes, 26th Amendment lowers the voting age to 18. Like, that is the real trajectory of our development as a union. That's what the Trumpists hate. That's what they can't handle. I mean, they still want to go back to the state legislatures picking US senators, what the populists and the progressives called corporation senators, because big corporations, oil companies would come in, Standard Oil, and just buy senators by spreading money around the legislatures. So that's the momentum that we've got to keep going against the racism, the white supremacy, the corporate rule that they've got in mind for us.
Before we finish up, and we've gone through a lot of our questions here, I want to give Tope a last moment. We've just got a couple minutes, but is there, I'd love to, I'm not going to put words in either of your mouths, but this relationship that you have to IPS is a big deal. And Tope, maybe we'll bring you in for a second to reflect with the congressman on that.
Yeah, it truly is an important relationship, and I'm so glad to have a personal relationship with the Raskin family. They've been so good to me, and I think they serve as a kind of foundation for us as we think about how to ensure that democracy survives, you know. And Jamie's been a leader in that regard, so it's truly a pleasure to be in conversation with you, Jamie. And I just wish you all the strength as you continue to do everything that you're trying to do, especially considering the loss that you suffered last year.
Thank you very much, Tope. That means a
John,
lot.
could I just say, the fact that Jamie Raskin is in the Congress is something to take a moment to think hard about. What we've just heard from you, wisdom, humanity, brilliance, we could sit here for many more hours, but I understand democracy is not a static thing, that there's a collective, but when you first ran for the state Senate, who knew? Anyway, I want to thank you for your wisdom, and also to pick up on what Tope said, not just that you're a defender, but that you're a Tom Paine of our times. I mean, you're advancing a democracy, a small d democracy that I'm sure people on this call today feel very inspired and moved by, because these are tough, grim times, and we can't be demobilized. And I think what you've given us is the spirit to move forward. And I thank you, and I thank John, and I thank Tope, and I thank people who are on the call. And we cherish our conversations with you, Jamie. And we do have in March 16th, I think we have Ellie Mistal and Dahlia Lithwick talking about a topic which you spoke so brilliantly, but dejectedly about the court. And then on the 23rd, in the spirit of freedom to read, we have Art Spiegelman and Viet Thanh Nguyen talking about the danger we've seen of book banning, not new, book burning, and the freedom to read. So consistent with that, we begin with you.
Thank you, Katrina. Sorry, Jamie, go. Let me throw something else, and then we'll let you finish us off here, Congressman. Thank you, Tope, and thank you, Katrina. And I'll just throw my last thing in. It is sometimes a lonely game to be an optimist or to be hopeful. And I will argue that while Jamie Raskin, after his name, has D Maryland or D democracy, he also has D hope. And he strikes me as one of the most hopeful members of Congress and one of the most hopeful people in our politics. And with that, Jamie, we'll give you the last word.
Well, John, thank you. Katrina, thank you. Tope, what an honor and what a delight it's been to be with you guys. I'll quote my dad, who used to say to us, if everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. And you guys provide me a lot of hope. And people should remember that the whole pessimism, cynicism, apathy thing is a strategy to demobilize people and to demoralize people. So don't fall for that strategy. If you need to take a couple of days off, take a couple of days off. This is not a solo effort. This is something we're doing together. And again, we're the vast majority of the country, and never forget that.
Thank you, Jamie.
Solidarity, Jamie. Take care and be strong. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. This has been a great conversation with Congressman Jamie Raskin, joined by Katrina and Tope, but also by all of your tremendous questions and comments. Again, thank you, Congressman, and thanks to everybody for joining this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.